I'm pleased to introduce to you Amba Kak. Amba Kak is the co-executive director of the AI Now Institute, where she leads research and policy efforts to address the societal impacts of artificial intelligence and concentrated tech power. With 15 years of global experience in government, industry, and civil society, she recently served as senior advisor on AI to the Federal Trade Commission. In 2024, she was named one of Time's 100 most influential people in AI. Please welcome to the stage Amba Kak.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Is this working? Yes. So a quick thank you to Joyce from Geo for being my Sherpa through this experience, and also to Jeff Jimenez-Kurlander for bringing our work to this community. So with that, let me start. So it's a wild time for AI, and there are many, many kinds of AI conversations you can have these days, even without trying, right? There's the speculative doomsday variant, which is exemplified by something called the AI 2027 project, where AI researchers speculate that we're only a few years away from super intelligent AI that might even threaten to go rogue on humanity. There's a speculative utopia version, and this is exemplified by an essay called Machines of Loving Grace by Dario Amodei, the Anthropic CEO. And he tells us similarly that the super intelligent version of AI could be, not so far away. And if it is, so is the elimination of most cancers, ending poverty, and the mitigation of climate change wholesale. Now there's also a more practical, more imminent, but I'd argue not always completely without speculation conversation about productivity gains and AI. How is AI revolutionizing work? Which jobs will it replace? Which jobs will it create? Now, I have a bone to pick with each version of this conversation, which is that it positions society as on the receiving end of this technological revolution, as passive observers to the onward march of technology, and the technology itself is somehow imbued or endowed with a sense of its own innate agency. It leaves the vast majority of people disempowered, as desperately working, thinking about how they might reskill, upskill, and reimagine their lives entirely so that they won't be left behind. And so I'd like to offer a provocation that, in our view, cuts through this, drawing inspiration from a fight that we're part of right now, which is to make debates about AI as ones about power and not progress, not alarm, not celebration about speculative futures, but reclaiming agency in terms of which direction we move, and also reclaiming expertise in terms of who gets a seat at this table. And spoiler alert, we all do. This is a conversation about AI and the common good. So to start with, what does AI have to do with power? I'm going to get to the slides in a second. Now, to answer that question, we need to step back from the kind of specific individual applications, ChatGPT and the like, and we need to better understand the industry, the economic factors that are driving this industry. Now, the good news is we already know this industry pretty well through the moniker of big tech. AI, and this is maybe not as well understood, is actually a product of concentration of power among the very same tech giants, the same attention oligarchs that played an outsized role and continue to play an outsized role in shaping global information flows and in capturing attention across many, some would argue, too many dimensions of our lives. It's the same companies that have sort of consistently betrayed public trust, starting with social media and now AI. Now, in fact, it is the social media era, that led and it's the social media era and also the inaction of regulators that led to this concentration of power and resources within a handful of firms. And it is what created the conditions that enabled large-scale AI. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that this advanced wave of tech that you're hearing about these days that increasingly undergirds chatbots, but also facial recognition systems that you see at the airports, it's based on this bigger is better paradigm of AI. And in this paradigm, and we've been studying this, the sort of history of AI, which goes back almost 70 years, we've seen that these advancements haven't necessarily come from scientific breakthroughs. In fact, the algorithms that power ChatGPT are almost 2 decades old. What has changed, or what was the step change, was what these algorithms could do when matched with key resources. Much more, exponentially more data, and exponentially more computational resources, chips, cloud access, and of course talent to make the most of these resources. So who controls these resources already? It's the same tech giants, big tech. And it's by their control over social media, apps, devices, that they also control the pathways to monetize this highly expensive tech. Now, you're probably thinking, but what about OpenAI or Anthropic? These seem like new upstarts. But that's really a fiction, because these companies exist by virtue of their partnerships, and this is without exception, their partnerships with these very same companies who they rely on for computing infrastructure and for pathways to market, to consumers. So it's an ecosystem that gives a sort of mirage of disruptive innovation, but most of it, and more increasingly every day, is built on top of a handful of systems that are controlled by the biggest players, and they're also the same players that are best placed to capture the value. Now, I'm giving this sort of market explainer because I think it's important to understand that the AI market is highly concentrated, but that it's also continuously, in real time, further concentrating wealth and resources and power back to these very same companies. But AI's function, and this is what my talk is going to be about, as a tool to centralize power goes way beyond these market dynamics. It's a pernicious playbook for how AI applications have come to mediate society in a much more pervasive way, by helicoptering solutions that are built on the extraction of value and expertise from all corners of society. And these solutions, AI solutionism, eventually enriches a very small section of firms, as I've just explained, while amounting to the further degradation of life for the most marginalized among us. And that's the fight that we're part of. So to begin, consulting the public record, right? At AI Now, we have been watchdogs over this industry for close to a decade now. And so what we've been doing in this frenzied moment is to really consult the record to pin down AI's impact on the public. Now, I said a decade, but didn't ChatGPT and the rest of it just drop in 2023? Now, that's kind of a common misconception. While these generative AI tools are today's the sort of buzzwords that splash across our headlines, there's also a range of so-called predictive AI systems that are already ubiquitous and have been for, as I said, close to a decade now. They're mediating decision-making across banking, hiring, gig work, criminal justice, immigration, or the social media algorithms that often shape the information we see or influence what we're persuaded by and what we get addicted to. Now, this is a very key reframing because the entry point for many people to AI is through chatbots, but much more frequently, the public has already interacted with AI technologies used not by us, but on us. The techniques and vendor names will vary, but the industry incentives and, crucially, the failure modes remain the same across these various kinds of AI. So what are these key pathologies? First, it's that we're seeing that AI's benefits are routinely wildly overstated, and its risks are swept under the rug. Now, this isn't surprising. It's a sad but unfortunate reality that the current stage of AI science, particularly the science that evaluates benefits and claims made by AI, is entirely dominated by industry labs, the same industry labs that have everything to gain from overplaying benefits and sweeping risks under the rug. To take a recent and just the most egregious example, Leaders in AI have routinely been claiming that advanced AI has the potential to cure all cancers in exactly those absolute terms. I mentioned Anthropic already. The Google DeepMind CEO said the same on 60 Minutes. And it's the number one thing that Sam Altman claimed when President Trump pushed him in a press conference to justify the $500 billion price tag that was being put to a new AI data center project. He said, well, I think it'll cure cancer, or so I've heard, in a few years. Now, this broad premise that AI could meaningfully aid the development of cancer research is absolutely indisputable. But these fuzzy, absolute, and sort of absolutist claims that are flying around, that AI will be a silver bullet for a vastly complex problem space simply by asserting that some form of superintelligence is around the corner, is, to put it simply, snake oil. And I want to also note that these are the claims that are flying around unverified at the very same time as we're seeing the federal government make massive cuts to biomedical research. Meanwhile, the fundamental technical concerns with these technologies are being swept under the rug. So you're probably all familiar with this. AI systems in their current form, they have this intractable problem. They make things up. This is called, the kind of technical term of art is hallucinations, not very technical. It leaves the humans in this technology in the unenviable position of fact-checking the tech that was meant to make their lives easier. Now, this has thrown a major wrench in the works for businesses that are trying to adopt this technology and to position it as the railroads of the future. What makes it even more uncomfortable is that a recent study published by Nature, and this was reported in the New York Times yesterday again, said that these problems of hallucination are inherent to the scale paradigm. These may never go away. Even more importantly, and this is key, when AI systems fail, they don't fail evenly. They fail in many instances, and we've seen this again over the last decade. The risks or errors that come from these untested and unproven technologies fall disproportionately on low-income communities, on immigrants, on people of color. It's algorithms that encode bias is in some ways commonly understood now, but we've seen how predictive policing systems replicate historical patterns of discriminatory policing. We've seen how algorithms used by insurers continue to disproportionately deny coverage to Black patients, and we've seen hiring systems that boost white male candidates. They especially like it if your name is Chad for some reason, and they replicate these discriminatory patterns called cultural matching. Which brings me to number 2, which is that we consistently see the helicoptering of solutions, and we've seen a sharp uptick in this, that displace grounded expertise. Now, there's tremendous AI FOMO going around, so there's a push to reframe every problem so that it can be AI-sized. Now, what this has done is to often undermine and actively devalue the authority of trained professionals who actually come from these fields, and that can be really dangerous, sometimes in the most literal way possible. So we see the hard coding of systems that cannot be modified even if their outcomes are incorrect. My favorite / worst example comes from National Nurses United, the largest union of registered nurses in this country, which reports that a significant number of nurses were not able to modify inaccurate algorithmic recommendations based on their own clinical judgment of their patients' needs. Now, this is especially scary given the number of reported instances where it's nurses that have identified that AI systems are ignoring patient allergies or underlying health conditions. And this is sort of related, which is that AI is often being used as a kind of smokescreen to mask much deeper inequities, austerity by another name. A recent report by Tectonic Justice provided a comprehensive list of examples of this AI as austerity phenomenon. Over a decade ago, Michigan had a very expensive $47 million AI fraud detection system. It was intended to better identify benefit fraud in the state. It was in error 70% of the time. It wrongly accused 40,000 residents of fraud, and it resulted in more than one suicide. We've seen the same with AI systems being used to determine Medicaid eligibility in Indiana, Arkansas, Idaho, Oregon. And the real headline here isn't that, oh, AI is in error a bunch of the time. It's that, are these errors really disguising a much more straightforward austerity mandate to roll back the social safety net because AI did it? And nowhere is this sort of AI as smokescreen phenomenon clearer than the Musk-led Doge program that we're seeing right now, a wholesale attack on the administrative state under the guise of AI as a tool that will modernize and bring efficiencies to government. It has led, and particularly the claim around AI, has led to a wholesale data grab justified, taking extremely sensitive citizen data into the hands of unaccountable individuals and actors. And already the most immediate effects of this have been to largely devalue government work, to put thousands of expert civil society servants out of their job, and to render the democratic process itself as waste to be eliminated. I'm going to actually skip to number 5, which is that AI is frequently coercive. Now, this is true in terms of economic coercion, the ways in which algorithmically powered systems determine people's wages or even grocery prices. There's a massive uptick in algorithmic pricing in grocery stores. But beyond economic coercion, and this should not be forgotten as it routinely is, immigration and criminal justice have been the laboratories for some of the most error-prone and invasive AI technologies. Despite dubious legality and very well-known flaws, we're seeing an uptick, for example, in AI being integrated in immigration enforcement, and this is likely for obvious reasons to escalate. Acting ICE Director Todd Lyons has expressed his aspirations to run, for the agency to run deportations like Amazon Prime for human beings, and to use AI in particular to free up detention bed space and fill up airplanes. The use of AI, in other words, provides a veneer of objectivity that is often masking steep political pressures and routinely violating due process. So all of this to say, the question that a lot of us are having these days, which is ChatGPT and all the rest of this new AI stuff helpful or not? Is it all it's hyped up to be? Might be the wrong question because it belittles and obscures what's really at stake, which is whether this further concentration and transfer of power to the AI industry at the expense of most of the rest of the society is good overall, is good for society. Maybe another important question is another AI trajectory possible? Now, the AI hype of the past year, and I might be speaking personally here, has really sucked the air out of an already stuffy room, making it feel futile and sometimes even impossible to imagine anything other than the steady march towards the inevitable rise and takeover by AI and its industry. But no matter how true that might feel, it is only that. It's a feeling, and it's not reality, at least not yet. So how can we move the needle? And here, as AI Now, we speak to many different communities, but here we speak to the philanthropic community that is uniquely positioned to corral, to connect, and to support the movements we desperately need. So 1, we need to situate AI within broader movement building, and we need to make AI a fight about power, not progress. AI is a very potent entry point for conversations around power and inequality that knit together across climate, racial justice, immigration, labor, and equally, I would argue there's a risk that those movements that aren't considering AI or big tech in their broader strategy might be caught off guard longer term. I was telling someone this morning that I suspect in 10 years, every funder in this room will, whether they like it or not, be working on AI. But now is the moment where it matters. Now is the moment where we can shape this trajectory. Now, we have examples on this first point of where we're seeing this broader kind of movement building. I mentioned Doge. There's an opportunity here to include, to kind of start bridging those dots, to talk about how Musk is using AI to help the Trump administration enact an austerity agenda, one that particularly hurts the working class and communities of color. AI data center acceleration is another ripe ground for organizing, and a lot of that is actually already underway, where folks are kind of comparing the fact that unrestrained AI infrastructure build-out is being justified on the promise of economic growth, but those promises, especially the promises of good jobs, aren't really bearing out. On the other hand, ordinary people are already facing higher energy costs, air and water pollution, while tech companies get tax breaks. And so it's a really good entry point to ask, what does the public have to gain, and what does the public have to lose from this particular AI craze? Second, We need to advance worker organizing as the clearest path to protecting us and our institutions from AI-enabled capture. It is workers experiencing technologies firsthand who best sort of understand the impacts, the limitations, and also the conditions under which AI's potential can be realized in an empowering way. So we do need to resource worker groups for a comprehensive analysis of how AI is affecting both working conditions and also the public interest to develop comprehensive bargaining, organizing, and policy campaign strategies. And AI Now is involved in working with unions on this work. 3, and as a bona fide policy wonk, or wait, that's 4. I'm going to get to 4 first. 4, as a bona fide policy wonk, I was going to say that I think we can't give up on regulation. We have the right regulatory tools to strike at the heart of tech power. We just need to enact what we're calling a zero-trust regulatory agenda to succeed. What this means is that trust in AI firms and their benevolence is not smart, it's not informed, it's not a credible option anymore. We need to enact rules that restrict the most harmful uses of AI, that prevent automation of jobs that we think should not be automated. We want to regulate AI from throughout the life cycle from nose to tail. And most importantly, we need to make sure that AI companies aren't creating their own homework. Now, there is a movement across the states to push for legislation in this direction. We've already seen a number of laws already enacted. One of my favorite recent examples is California's AB 1018. It was sponsored by SEIU California and the Tech Equity Collaborative. And that law really requires developers and deployers of AI tech, especially the tech used in consequential life decisions, to contract with independent third parties to assess risks from inaccuracy and bias before these systems are even rolled out. Finally, we do need to build a positive agenda for public-centered innovation, and AI may not be at the center of it. So what could this look like? This means resourcing research on alternative R&D pathways that aren't adequately incentivized by this current industry-led model. To help illuminate a vision that breaks out of this bigger is better mold, which, as I explained in the beginning, all roads really do lead to big tech under that paradigm. Key here will be ensuring that structurally disadvantaged groups have deliberate authority in this conversation as experts. I'm really excited by a recent agreement signed by Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania with SEIU Local 688, which actually forms a worker board who will oversee decisions around whether and in what contexts generative AI tools are used in the public sector. So to underscore, there are many alternatives to this version of AI. There are many new ways to shape new worlds. But like AI, these alternatives are not inevitable. I can't emphasize this enough. This is that inflection point. I think making these alternatives possible starts by asking and then answering that question, which is, what is the world we want? We can realize a world with good jobs, with shared prosperity, freedom and autonomy, a sustainable future, a vibrant democracy. And then we need AI that works in service of those goals and not against them. Thank you.